Welcome to an upside down world.
A podcast from Tearfund Australia with your hosts Joel McKerrow
And Grace Naum.
Today on the podcast, we're going to be chatting with Tara Conrad, who's from Perth, which is going to be amazing. And for the first time, I'm actually getting to sit here in the same room as Gracie Naum.
Lucky you.
It's very exciting. We've never actually met in the flesh before, so it's wonderful to get to do so for this podcast.
This podcast comes to you from many different places throughout Australia, but Joel and I are based in Melbourne and Cronulla, respectively.
So as we begin this whole series, we want to pay our respects to the traditional custodians of the land. For me, I'm on Wurundjeri country of the Kulin Nations, here in what we now know as Melbourne, but was called Naarm for many, many years by the Indigenous people.
And I pay my respects to the elders past and present of the Darawal Nation, which is now known as Cronulla. Joel, tell us about yourself.
I'm a poet and a spoken word artist and a writer and a speaker, and I do lots and lots of different things, kind of touring the world over before COVID hit us, sharing my poetry and speaking and running workshops and stuff all over the world in schools and in juvie justice centres, in Indigenous communities and refugee communities. My life is poetry and stories, and so like getting to do this podcast where we're going to be interviewing lots of different people around their own story and their reflections on life and the Beatitudes and Lent this season we're coming into. I'm super excited. What about you? Who are you, Gracie? Because people may not know who you are.
No, totally. I am an actor and an acting coach. You may know me as contestant number 3 from the Smith's Chips ad of 2019.
Or the Goose ad. You might know her as the Goose from, what was that ad?
British Paints.
British Paints, the Goose. Just look it up. You'll be...
Yeah. So now you know my face, clearly. Not at all. So I love both of those things. I find them so life-giving. I'm pretty new to my journey with Tearfund. I did a little bit of work for them in 2014, which actually really sparked a love for writing, which freaked me out and also really excited me. To be doing this podcast with Tearfund, which is an organisation that I just really believe in, particularly in the way that they listen so deeply to communities. It's just so exciting, and it's so exciting to be doing it with Joel, who I've been following and been a fan of.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah,
Shucks.
Totally.
Yeah, it's wonderful to get to come and do this together. For those who are listening, we're going to be chatting over the next, 8 weeks in this lead up to Lent, but obviously you could be listening to it any time. So it's not just a Lent podcast, but it's kind of focused around Lent.
Yeah,
we're going to be chatting through the Beatitudes, so much different stuff for us to get into.
Yeah, and I don't think that I've ever focused, throughout my going to church, I was kind of born into an Anglican church. We didn't study the Beatitudes. I can't remember studying them.
Yeah, right.
And it's been so life-giving to have these conversations.
Hasn't it? They've been amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm excited for us, and I'm excited for you.
Yeah, we're going to be chatting through essentially God's love in action in our world and how that brings peace and hope, which, I mean, in our world that feels so divisive right now, which is a word that we often use to talk about the reality of our world because it's so true, like whether it's left versus right and progressive versus conservative and now vaxxers versus anti-vaxxers. Like there's so much stuff that is taking us either way, taking us away from each other. And I wonder if as we begin this time of Lent, is this something, and is this series, this time, something that could actually bring us toward each other?
Yeah. I think, so often and because society moves so quickly, we gravitate towards black and white. But I think Jesus and the Beatitudes, they're calling us to listen deeply to who God is and who he has made us to be, and what is our what are we moving towards in the everyday, and how can we be more intentional about living out how Jesus wants us to live.
Yeah, they kind of feel like a blueprint, or I mean, maybe not a blueprint, maybe that's too specific, maybe a map or just like a general direction, a compass direction for us to head into.
Yeah.
To say this is the way forward through the murkiness of our world. I think the Beatitudes offer us a way forward in the fracturedness of our world, which is kind of really what we want to nut out through this series, I think.
Absolutely. Dave Andrews says, if the Beatitudes are referred to, they are usually cited as picture postcard spiritual promises, not as basic practical operating principles. They are actually an original, imaginative, and brilliantly doable set of realistic ideals that give us a way to engage a world of poverty and violence.
Brilliant. I love it. I really do think it's exactly what they do. And to put it in kind of frame, to get us in more of a holistic frame of where we are. So we're in the Sermon on the Mount, and Matthew tells us Jesus walks up the mountain and he begins to teach. And many scholars actually talk about how this movement up the mountain, it harkens back to that time of Moses, also moving up the mountain, walking up the mountain and receiving the 10 Commandments, and then bringing these 10 Commandments to the people. And the 10 Commandments were all about bringing order into chaos, like bringing order into this chaotic kind of society. And then we have Jesus in the Beatitudes walks up the mountain to give the Sermon on the Mount, and the people come around him just like they did when Moses came down the mountain with the two, whatever they're called. What are they called? Plaques? They're not called plaques. Tablets? Who knows? We'll call them that. We're really good biblical scholars in this place. Jesus walks up almost as symbolic of this new law. And so if the old law, I think, was about bringing order into chaos, I wonder if these 8 Beatitudes are a little bit about, they're kind of about sitting in the disorder of our world, like in the chaos of our world, the tensions that don't feel right, the mess. Like, how do we hold together the disordered reality of our world and not have to control it, but learn actually how to embrace the paradoxes found within it? Because so many of the Beatitudes are just so paradoxical. They're so I mean, we'll hear them. Why don't we how about we share them now?
Absolutely.
And maybe what we'll do, we've got an NIV and a Message version here. What if we do one each? Just to get us going. And then after this, we're going to get into our first interview with Tara. Let's just to bring us all back in so we remember what these Beatitudes are. Do you want to, how about I do the NIV and then you do the Message? Should we do that?
Sure, let's do it.
And we'll see what happens. This is Matthew 5, verse 3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
You're blessed when you're at the end of your rope. With less of you, there is more of God and his rule.
Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted.
You're blessed when you feel you've lost what is most dear to you. Only then can you be embraced by the one most dear to you.
Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth.
You're blessed when you're content with just who you are, no more, no less. That's the moment you find yourselves proud owners of everything that can't be bought.
Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled.
You're blessed when you've worked up a good appetite for God. He's food and drink in the best meal you'll ever eat.
Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy.
You're blessed when you care. At the moment of being careful, you find yourselves cared for.
Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God.
You're blessed when you get your inside world, your mind and heart put right. Then you can see God in the outside world.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God.
You're blessed when you can show people how to cooperate instead of compete or fight. That's when you discover who you really are and your place in God's family.
Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
You're blessed when your commitment to God provokes persecution. The persecution drives you even deeper into God's kingdom.
So friends, that's where we're going with our 8-week series together. We're super excited. We have interviews with people from all over the world, a whole bunch of Australians or on people from this land we now call Australia. And we have people from overseas. It's going to be a really fantastic time. The other thing that we're bringing into this podcast, for some of you, you may have been receiving Tears Lent cards, which has a beautiful picture this year of various people throughout the world. And part of what we wanted to do is actually to share some of their stories on this podcast. And the way we're doing it, being that Gracie and I are both writers and poets, we're actually going to be using kind of reflecting on these various people's stories through the use of poetry. As a way to kind of share with you some of the reality about this beatitude and how it connects into the life of someone who has lived in some really harsh conditions. So if you don't have those Lent cards, make sure you jump on to tearfund.org.au and follow the links through, and you'll be able to sign up for this next 8 weeks of getting those cards and really being able to intentionally engage with Lent over this time. This first poem we're about to listen to before we get into the interview with Tara is from Grace, and it's a little bit about the life of Rotafina, who's the mother of Dorca, some of those kids playing with that ball you can see in that first card there of our first week of Lent. So the poem really delves into both her life and into Grace's own life and these things that hold us together. And one of those things that we reflect on today, this is our first beatitude, is the idea of the poor in spirit. So sit back and enjoy this poetic exploration into the Beatitudes that we'll be doing each week as we come together. This one, all of them in fact have music, are backed by music by the outstanding pianist David Andrews from Sydney, who like our interviewer today, is also a Hillsonger. We've got a few Hillsong representatives on the podcast. Sit back, enjoy this poem, and then we'll get into the interview.
2 women sit on a bridge, 2 strangers who never meet. The first, Rotafina Sadie, Mozambique, 2017. She set up makeshift housing on borrowed land, days folded into months that folded into years. Armed men from militant groups walk the rubble of what was her home, while she watches her barefooted son kick a soccer ball made of discarded plastic held together by string. An indefinite sentence of displacement, stuck in the in-between. She waits, as if on a suspended bridge between her past home and a future one, a wilderness of waiting as far as the eye can see. Future dreams suddenly as fluid as water drip through the cracks of the bridge, her daughter graduating school, her youngest starting, the crops continuing to thrive from one year to the next. Her mind has created a family album of future memories, no longer hers to keep, stolen by the militant violence. Even the air on the bridge is still as if the wind has given up on it. She looks back on the busyness of home life, looking after the family, the farm, the field ripe with purpose, belonging, meaning. She was breathless back then, but the beautiful kind. Now suddenly suspended in stillness, a claustrophobic quiet and wriggling questions stored in the deep underground of her insides suddenly start to simmer to the surface. Who am I when my home is taken away? Who am I when my community is uprooted? Who am I?
There is an inner speechlessness, a deadening silence, a numbness that slips through limbs. She grips the rails of the bridge. Tell me, how does this end? The other woman on the bridge, gripping fingers as tight as Rotafina. The other woman is me. Over the other side of the world, but still on the bridge of the in-between. It's the year 2021. A COVID-19 lockdown has just been enforced in Sydney, Australia. The pace of life, once like a bird in blue skies and full flight. Now time drunkenly stumbles up the stairs to each midnight. Is there anything as formidable as perpetual stillness? I accepted God's love into my life years before, but dressed my confidence in busyness, in meeting expectations and people's approval. But those motivations are mostly derelict in the waiting. Months pass, and as I sit and start to dig and get closer to my core, I'm not so scared of finding regret or brokenness. I'm scared that I won't find anything at all. Emptiness, a silent and simple nothing. I've been addicted to doing and trying and controlling whatever I can, but now, living on this bridge, I give in. I sit down on the splintery wooden boards, my legs dangle off the edge, my sense of self suspended. What is being okay? What is beautiful? Who are you, God? Who am I at the core of me? I don't know. God, I don't know. And I don't know how to do today, to do this hour, to do right now. I'm angry with you for withholding what gave me purpose. I'm angry with you for yet another day in the in-between. I'm angry with myself for being angry with you because even in this liminal space, you have given me so much. I'm tired of failing. I'm tired of stuffing up and then not being able to fix it. I'm tired of not letting you fix it, not letting you fix me. Please fix me. Please fix me. Sit with me, God. Hold my restless body, wriggling fear and the secret camouflage insecurities that I can't fully see, let alone mend. I am poor in faith, in energy, consistency and reliability, poor in heart, poor in hope. I'm hollow in the deep place. I'm poor in spirit. Both of us, poor in spirit. Me, Western girl, her, African woman, poor in spirit. We sit on the bridge of the in-between. My body doesn't speak the language of unconditional love. This non-detachable love from God, it's unreasonable, illogical, uncomfortable. I just don't get it. At least not now. And God knows it. Here on the bridge, in the in-between, He sits beside me. He sits beside her, Rotafina, our legs dangling over the edge, side by side. He looks at her, a steady gaze. He looks at me, a steady gaze. He hasn't missed a word. His withness so full, honest, empathetic. And together we sit, not two on the bridge, but three. Together we sit. I feel his breathing, a rhythm with no regard for time. And gradually, my lungs are beginning to learn the rhythm. Gradually, our lungs are beginning to learn the rhythm. We are together on the edge, in the in-between. And though Rotafina and I cannot see the end, in his presence, we begin to see and hold and breathe hope.
Such a beautiful poem. Thank you so much, Grace and David, for that wonderful reflection. We're going to move into our interview now. We're going to start off our interviews with Tara Conrad. Tara has a social work background. She's a pastor from Perth. I met Tara many years ago, I think maybe even at the Justice Conference, which Tear Australia and a bunch of others have put on, that many of you may have been to. Tara is a stunning woman who has been for years and years and years been tirelessly bringing the call to justice into the Pentecostal church within Australia. She is an inspiration for me and many, many others. So it's wonderful to start off with someone who is a Hillsong pastor on this podcast about social justice. Let's hear from Tara. Hey friends, it is wonderful to get to come and share with you all and have a chat. We're sitting here on opposite sides of Australia. Grace and I are sitting with Tara. Tara, I don't even know how to say your last name. Conrad? Is it just Conrad?
Yep.
It's just spelt strangely. It's just got
extra letters, just to be complicated.
Just a few extra silent letters. So Tara, I've known you for a few years now, just through kind of through the world of the Christian circles and the world, and it's wonderful to have you on this very first episode of this Tearfund podcast to chat about life and all that kind of thing. Grace, you don't know Tara at all, is that right?
No, yeah, we've only just met. So yeah, Tara, can you tell us a little about yourself?
Where to start? In Perth, and currently pastor with Hillsong, have a background in social work, which, I don't know, I think maybe led to me getting involved in some different spaces as far as church leadership goes. And also, just as a side note, picked up some theology studies and quite enjoy that space. So
you've been pastoring for a while now?
I think longer than, more than half of my life I've been a pastor.
Wow.
Yeah.
And like growing up, is this always where you wanted to land?
So I actually didn't grow up even in church at all. So I would have had no concept of that. When I was studying in high school, I went into social work, and I'd kind of just started hanging out in church in my latter years of high school. They ran a skate park where I could skate for free. Actually, even in my first couple of years in church, I was adamant I would never work in church because Christians were a little bit scary.
Yeah, that's understandable. Your passion for, because you have done a lot over the years in terms of social justice and working with people, things with refugees, lots and lots of different stuff. Has that all come, was that like before the whole Christian thing came for you? It sounds like you were already engaged in looking at social work throughout high school or whatever.
I think a little bit of my background, pretty sure my parents were legitimate 70s hippies. So raised with a little bit of that. I look back at all the music that is familiar to me as a child, and I'm like, oh, these lyrics are great. I think there's a bit of that. Then studying social work and kind of accidentally landed in church leadership as well, and just finding the gap between where some of those spaces were working and weren't working was something that I really got interested in working on.
Yeah. I love that. And I love that our first cab off the rank, so to speak, is a Hillsong pastor. Because we're kind of Tearfund Australia is social justice, obviously focused. We have a lot of people who I reckon would be thinking, why the heck have they got a Hillsong pastor on to start with? Where's our social justice people? But you are a social justice person and you're a Hillsong person. And for many Christians in Australia, that's a hard thing to bring together. Can you, like, how do you hold those two things together? Can you speak to that? Because I know there's a lot of social justice focused people within Hillsong, but it's often not what we think of when we think of Pentecostal Hillsong. We think prosperity doctrine and things like that. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. I think to speak to like even just the Pentecostal space generally, a lot of people have a perception of the Pentecostal world that comes from maybe, you know, an era of 10 or 15 years prior to what is actually the space now. It's also a really kind of fluid space at the moment. There is just so much moving in a lot of that. And a lot of people, I guess, don't realize why there is so many people like social justice type people in Hillsong is because there really is space for that. And it's one of the only Pentecostal churches I know of that has an actual social justice department and has, you know, there's a lot of stuff that has been done behind the scenes, and it's done probably more quietly than you might expect a megachurch to get involved in, you know, community programs, but not just service provision, but really looking at best practice and bringing some really, really necessary expertise and reform to that space. So it's really exciting to be there actually, and a lot of room to grow. A lot of stuff that, you know, still we're working on, but just a lot of space to do that. So
wow,
I love that you'd be able to hold that kind of diversity. Like I was just thinking, I was chatting with a friend of mine who's at Hillsong last year, I forget when we were chatting, and he was saying he's quite different to a lot of people that he feels like he sits next to in Hillsong, but he's like, actually, I go to church because I need to sit next to people I disagree with, and that's actually really important to be able to be in community with people, whether we are social justice people or hyper spirit people, like to be able to come together and connect like that. It's so important. So I love that you feel like that kind of culture is actually upheld as a good thing within there. Is wonderful.
So it's been great to even have conversations with people who are really passionate about the social justice space, but maybe have kind of disconnected that from their faith because it's not necessarily been something they've talked about a lot in church, and helping kind of draw some lines and build some bridges between that is one of my favorite things to do. So
wow. And just how much I feel like you would discover about God's character by taking part in that kind of ministry if you haven't done it before. Like I think it's frightening. And kind of an adventurous way to exploring more about who God is.
Yeah, I've always loved going to churches that have been different. So when I would travel, even before being part of Hillsong, I'd kind of check out churches more like Hillsong, and then, or sometimes, you know, find a high church, you know, Anglican service on like Easter Saturday, or like I've loved getting to know, I guess, the breadth and depth of the body of Christ.
Now, this is being launched over Lent, and during Lent, the Lent period, it's a lead up to Easter and the lead up to the cross. We're engaging with the Beatitudes. What do they mean for you during this Lenten period?
Everything. No, so I guess like the prophetic picture that it draws, like starting at a place of looking at what could be, or what is supposed to be, or what is what does the kingdom look like? That's, I guess, how I read it, because I don't imagine Jesus meaning that was actually what was going on when he says, you know, blessed are, and makes these statements. So he's speaking to another truth. And so when he states that as a fact that is. The only other fact I guess I can consider is that is how it should be, or that is how it, that's what reality is supposed to look like. And so I guess I've leaned into that in terms of going, what do these things say about where we're supposed to be heading, and what we're considering during time of reflection like Lent.
I love that take on it, that it's both. It's kind of, we often talk in theology world about the now and the not yet. Like it's stating this reality that could be, should we choose to live out the kingdom now. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, and I guess making a statement about that kind of ultimate reality that brings, and I think that's the nature of the prophetic, right? It states what is a greater truth than the present reality. Mm-hmm. So it's, but in doing so, it names what's not. So it gives us a place to go.
What we really want to focus in on today is that the first beatitude. Blessed are those who are poor in spirit, for they will see the kingdom of heaven. My mind immediately goes to like that. Is this talking about poverty, like materially poor? The Greek, I looked up the Greek word before because that's what you're meant to do. No, just kidding. Because I think it brings lots of good stuff to us. The Greek word for poor that they use here is, I can't even say it, but it's P-T-O-C-H-O-I, which literally means the empty ones, the very empty ones, and those who are crouching, like those bent over beggars is kind of the idea. Those who are like frightened and cowering and bent over and hiding, and then also adds this word pneuma to make it not just poor, but poor in spirit. And what I'm kind of wrestling with is it just materially poor? Is it, whenever I come to this passage, what I wrestle with, is it just materially poor? Is it this spiritual sense of poverty as well? Or am I just like, do I just bring the spiritual sense of the poverty in because I'm just trying to justify my own privilege? What I'm kind of, does that make sense? Like what I'm wondering from you, Tara, is how do you read this and how do you hold this in terms of poverty of spirit? What does it look like to be poor in spirit?
Yeah, I kind of do the same, because I think that this passage has been impoverished by its use to kind of make out like we're not talking about those who are physically lacking, but we know because of the passage in Luke that it definitely is at least that. What I found interesting was looking at the possibility that it might be reflecting on some of the Old Testament phrases that are similar, like Isaiah 66 verse 2, where it talks about being not poor in spirit, but lacking in spirit. And it's the same, like David uses the expression in the Psalms to express his repentance. Devoid in spirit, he was like, but he's referring to his brokenness at what's happened. And for me, when I see like what I would look at as a glimpse of this kind of thing in practice, it's the people who, whatever their experience of having their needs met or not, it's a place or a posture of being able to recognize where they themselves are not living true to what we're called to live like. Like
it also makes me think of, it's saying that blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It also makes me think of the opposite of that in terms of so who would be the rich in spirit? Like what does that look like, and are they not blessed? Like is being, if the poor in spirit is this empty, like an emptiness to the point of begging kind of thing, they're the ones who see the kingdom of God. Is it like the rich in spirit is a fullness of like a kind of being full of myself. We don't get to see the kingdom of God when we're just full of ourselves and our own. Does that make sense? Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think even that theirs is the kingdom, and it's a present tense. It's like they experience the kingdom in that posture of, and I think the opposite is true. We distance ourselves from this reality that we're supposed to be living into when we create that kind of, or we carry ourselves with that posture of, I can't be wrong about this. I don't need to, well, I've always, or even that, well, I was just born into the situation I am. Why should I feel guilty about, all of that kind of rhetoric? Like, we actually put distance between ourselves and the ability to encounter the kingdom as it is when we posture ourselves like that. Yeah.
Wow.
And I think there's a sense also of just being distracted when you don't feel like you need God. You're just distracted by like all the demands and maintaining, like meeting expectations, maintaining your own reputation kind of thing. And so you don't stop to see God. And when we see God and really take time, which is what is so beautiful about taking time during Lent to really reflect and digest, this is the reality of his character. Next to him, you then see your brokenness. You see the necessity of acknowledging your helplessness.
Yeah, and that's what makes, I guess, this a great place to start for Lent, is the fact that this is a practice, and we're not going to suddenly, because we decide to take on a Lent devotional, become, the epitome of poor in spirit and get it all right. But it is.
Oh, I am.
We can try. But we can, it's part of putting that into practice. It's making a conscious decision to reflect on, what do I need to change in order to be more like that.
Yeah, it's a bit of a slam. I'm just listening to you talk now. It's a bit of a slam to the ego. It's actually calling us to surrender our absolute and no, I've got it right. I've got it together. I am, you can go to the opposite of rich, but we might go to something else and say, I am content in and of myself, or I know the way that this should be, or all those ways I'm thinking about that we hold on so tightly to our own strength, our own wisdom, our own ability to live this out.
Yes.
What I feel like this is calling us is actually to empty ourselves, to be empty and say, I don't need to have it together. I don't need to have all the right answers. It's a really freeing thing as well of being able to begin again, the whole beginner's mind kind of idea. I'm wondering, for me, it's a whack to the ego in terms of my threeness as an Enneagram 3 person. I think you're an Enneagram 3 person from what I know as well, Tara. This verse kind of is going into the very opposite of who we are, because so much of Enneagram 3, for those who are listening that don't know Enneagram, don't worry, Enneagram 3 is just kind of the achiever, someone who is doing and wanting to be seen to be doing. What does that speak to you as someone who is an achiever as well, who is driven by that in both good ways and bad ways? How does this verse kind of smash into you? Because it's smashing into me right now.
Yeah, I think it's really been a key kind of in my journey, and I think something that I've realized is sometimes we get caught in the idea that once we go through this process, it's once and done, I sorted that out, right? Especially I think when you've done the hard work of working through some stuff and you're I've invested in this, I've worked this out, I know what I know about this stuff, or I sit where I sit on this stuff, or like this is my crowd, or this is where I fit, or whatever it looks like. And for me, it was a process of, like even processing like my finding faith in the kind of church that I did, and what was handed to me, and sorting through all of what was good in that, and what I needed to maybe rethink in some of that, and getting to a place where I felt like this is how I want to look at my my walk with God, and this is how I think we should do community, and then coming round to this point where I actually found community was the last place I thought I was going to find community. And like it's like that when you asked when we jumped on, like, oh, did you see yourself being here? Like, well, the last place I would have told you I would see myself was in a big church. Like I was, kind of leaning towards that like home church type vibe, and creating a space where everyone could like think a certain, it's funny how like it's been the like most opposite like in actuality that I've encountered God in a way that I don't think I have in a really long time. And I've found community, and all the things I thought I was going to create one way is something that I've experienced in a complete other way. And it's just been that, place of me going, oh, I thought I'd worked through this stuff. I thought I knew where I needed to go with that. And there was an element of that being quite challenging because,
I bet.
Not sure if that's like a 3 thing, but it's like, hey, I've made this call and I've invested a lot to get to this place of thinking this. Like,
yeah. Wow. I really admire that. Like, it would have been so easy to kind of just even subconsciously just start to step away from different perspectives, different way of doing things. But you stayed listening and open. And yeah, I really admire that.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I did that intentionally or if it's just by the grace of God and some mostly just some really great wise friends that like, yeah.
It feels like though that it's a beautiful way forward, like in a world that we get on our bandwagon, we get on our high horse, our pulpit, our whatever it is, whether in whatever kind of sphere we're talking about, whether it's politics, whether it's progressive Christianity versus too conservative Christianity versus this versus that, like all of these things, and actually, no matter where we fall on any spectrum, this verse is saying it's okay for you to not have it together. In fact, you're blessed when you stop saying, no, I've got it right and everyone else has got it wrong. You're blessed. Yeah. You see the kingdom of God when you're like, oh, I'm so empty. Like, I have no idea. I'm so empty and I'm hungry and I'm begging. And that's a good place to be in. Because both, whatever sphere, whatever spectrum we're on, we just hold so tightly to it, and this is just such an offering of surrender. I think
lately I was just doing some journaling this morning, and it was like in my personal life, hard things are happening. Like, it's so easy to think hard things are happening, but despite that, God is good. But then I was like, no, hard things are happening and God is good, which the latter invites me to think, no, like to press more into the character of God, and the fact that I can't understand everything that's happening, but what does this say? Like, it invites me further into who is this Jesus? Like, I think there's an invitation for me to be more open.
Yeah, I think for me it has come down to humility and recognizing that we are still in need, and that when I think of poverty, like, all of the one common kind of denominator across all of the words that are translated poverty and is an idea of need. For me, it has come down to recognizing my own need and dependence, and I think it runs counterintuitive to our current kind of cultural independent, I am like, I don't need anyone else, or, but recognizing that that we're part of something that we can't separate ourselves from. And so therefore there will always be stuff that's unknown to us, stuff that we need to grow in understanding. And that's as much part of us as, working out our own individual desires and, goals and abilities. And we focus on a lot of those things. But I think part of recognizing ourselves is recognizing what we're part of. And if I look back, even when I walked into like a Christian community for the first time, came out of a place of brokenness and experiencing various kind of like separations and places where I feel like I had disconnected or had not had particular family members in my life that should have been there, and all of that sort of thing. And so finding community in a church environment wasn't something I was looking for. I was looking for a free escape, so it wasn't anything I did. But if I look back, I see that in my lack, I encountered the provision of God in a way that it's probably set the trajectory of my life. Like, it's what I believe that church is about because it's what I encountered firsthand.
Wow.
Yeah. What about in your role as like pastoring and stuff? Is there a story from that? I'm sure it's all been blue skies and amazing, but I'm just wondering if there is a bit of a horrendous reality that comes with that, as we know for many pastors. What's that looked like for you at times?
Yeah, it has, like, time and time again. Like, I think that you don't ever go into a leadership role imagining that you might suddenly be rethinking everything that you've ever kind of believed, and attempting to lead a community while navigating your own kind of figuring stuff out and all of that sort of thing. As a young leader who probably shouldn't have been thrown in the deep end without like any idea what I was doing in the first place.
How old are you when this was happening?
So I took on the senior leadership of a church at 27.
Wow.
Having been a youth pastor for 10 years and very little experience leading in, anything other than youth ministry. Yeah. But having experienced some stuff in that was, that recognition of the kingdom at work, and we'd seen some amazing things. That was a really challenging season, and it's, especially when it involves like relationships that have been years in the making, and then those change because of, the way the dynamic changes, the way that, people think or and are changing or not changing how they think. And so it's I think that where I had found community in church, that is also the place where it can be the deepest hurt, right? When that is something that is tipped upside down. And so
can I ask, what was it that brought on this time? Like, and you might need...
I've tried to work this out because like I look back and I could, every time I think, oh, that was the thing, and then I find another thing. But like,
wow,
we went through a whole lot of stuff ourselves. I lost my brother, and my husband lost his brother to cancer.
oh my goodness.
In a few years kind of succession. But, having a whole lot of things going on for us personally, but knowing friends who, their experience of church hadn't been the same kind of thing, and that I had encountered, and it hadn't been a good thing for them. And so, wanting to look at what was causing people who had a genuine faith kind of journey, but then walking away from the community that I'd found to be so good in my life, and going, well, what am I investing and giving, my my life to if it's not healthy and not being good for people. So there's just like a number of factors going on, I guess, as well as just conversations here, there, and everywhere that I would listen in on, and it would sort of change the way I think about something, and putting all of that back together. Yeah.
Wow, that would have been such a confronting, unsettling season. And to have to be in a place of leadership during wow, that's at the end of your blog that you wrote in January 2020, the blog called Welcome, Everything is Fine, you said a quote from a pastor friend, it's perhaps this is a terrible way for something wonderful to happen. I just wondered, like, two years on, how does that sentence resonate with you? Yeah,
it really is something I can only probably say there's more significance to that for me now because of what I've found this side of, it hasn't always been easy either. Even just generally our church has had its challenges, but, personally there's been all sorts of things that have not been easy, but definitely grateful for seeing what God is doing through the other side of all of that.
It's a phrase for me that almost like beautifully articulates this beatitude. Like, perhaps this is a terrible way for something wonderful to happen. Sounds very similar to blessed are the poor in spirit, for they will see the kingdom of heaven, or for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Like, it's the present thing. I love, like, it's everything we need to know, but find hard in those moments of despair and darkness that this could be a really horrific thing for something wonderful to happen. I wonder, what I'm wondering as we'll begin to head in towards a finish, as you said, it's a present reality, like the kingdom of heaven. Often when we talk about heaven in Christian circles, we're thinking future reality, but theirs is the kingdom is kind of the phrasing of, I think in the NIV, it's theirs will be, which kind of sounds like a future thing, but in King James it says theirs is the kingdom of heaven, and it is like, it's a better translation. It is present. It is now. It's here. And the kingdom being, I often think of a kingdom as the kingdom is the king's domain, the domain of the king, the realm of the king, the society of the king. It's a communal thing, like it's a communal reality. And I'm wondering if you can kind of speak into that communal reality, that in us trying to live out this upside down kingdom where the poor are blessed, where the poor in spirit, the empty, the beggars, the hunched over, they're so desperate, they're actually the blessed ones. Us trying to live that out as a community, what is that kind of, how now do we live with this beatitude? What does that look like for us?
Yeah, well, I think a great place to start, actually, so funny story, when I was first in church, there was this song, it was like, let the weak say I am strong, let the poor say I am rich, probably give away what era I started out in church in. But in my immaturity, I literally thought it was saying, let those who are poor say that I'm doing well, like let them look from the outside and say, well, we're doing well because such a prosperity, like this is, that'll also tell you about the culture of church that was kind of founded in. Right, so how backwards is that compared to what it's actually supposed to be saying? But I've found the flip side to that is like something that I think we can put into practice is asking, well, if Jesus is saying this is what, the true reality is supposed to look like, then I go, well, is the situation or the circumstance or the environment I'm creating, or is the decision I'm making, is it one where this person, whether it's, the poor as in Luke, or the poor in spirit, or, the humble, or, repentant, or whether it's the mourning, or, whatever, would they say, I am blessed because of what we're doing here? Would this decision lead to them saying, I am blessed?
Yeah.
Is the kind of world I'm creating leading to, the decisions I'm making are the things that I'm, committing my energies to or voting for, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Does it lead to a place where more of the people in that situation are going to say, I am blessed?
Wow.
That's really cool.
It's it brings it back to kind of the ethical thing of this calls out our ethics to be one. And I love that phrasing that no matter what situation we're in, it actually puts it on us as a community to say, how can we be that blessing? We're the ones who are going to show the poor in spirit, one, recognizing our own poverty of spirit, and two, being the community where those who are experiencing poverty and poverty of spirit all in together are blessed. That's a beautiful thing for us to head towards. That's huge and very difficult as well.
Yeah and it demands so much time. You've got to be really listening to the individual, to the people around you, to what they need, to what will be life-giving, what is necessary to bless them.
Imagine if we all did that as the church, what the church would actually become if we listened to the world, to where the poverty and the poverty of spirit is in the world, and say, now we know where we've got to be. We've got to be listening.
Yeah. Imagine. But even if we listened to each other, if we listened to people who were hurting because of a certain way we were doing things, or if we listened to people experiencing inequality in our own structures, it's it's not even just out there. I think it's as much close to home, and it's always going to be an imperfect practice, but I guess the call is to practice it anyway.
Yeah. And I mean, mashing the two together, being poor in spirit and listening, I mean, that just sounds like a prime combination.
Yeah. It sounds like a pretty good way forward, which is probably why Jesus said it as the first thing on the Sermon on the Mount.
I don't think we're ever really listening unless we go in with that posture, right? The potential that I could learn something here. Otherwise we're just we're just answering, we're just deflecting.
Yes, that's so true.
What a wonderful challenge maybe to leave us on is how we go out from here, from listening to this podcast, how we go out into our lives, and instead of holding up our own, this is the way that it is to actually listen with poverty of spirit to the world around us, and seek out where there's poverty in spirit, and connect with those people. Such a beautiful challenge and a really wonderful conversation for our first episode. Thank you so much for being part of this time.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a privilege to be up first, so looking forward to hearing from everyone else.
Creator God, your ways are good and your will is perfect. Thank you that in Jesus you show us the way and you invite us to be part of making the way. Lord, help us to recognize the things that are not yet as they should be, because in your reign all things are as they ought to be. Help us to desire the day when the poor say, I am provided for, when the weary find strength, and when all things are made new. Help us to seek you. Help us daily to make our way there by your grace and all for your glory, Jesus. Amen.
Thank you again to Tara. That was so awesome to chat.
It was wonderful, hey?
And what an amazing, completely unexpected way to start the Beatitudes, to start that blueprint of how to live that Jesus gives. That idea, he's so listening to who we are, to the mess of the world and to the mess within us individually. And he's saying, that's okay. You don't have it all together. Accept that you don't have it all together. And that is the best way to start what it means to live and this blueprint of how to live.
It's such a beautiful offering for us, I think, to go, oh, actually, I don't need to know it all. I don't have to have it all. But I can step into this Lent season, and I can step into my life in general, not having the answers. And that's the best place to be.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for listening to the very first episode of An Upside Down World with your host, Grace Nahum.
Go again.
Thank you so much for listening to the very first episode of An Upside Down World with your host. It's just easy. It's just easy, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to the very first episode of
We're stuck on the last line for all day.
Are we good?
Yeah. Good.
I'm good.
Sound it.
Thank you so much for listening to the very first episode of An Upside Down World podcast. I can't do it.
Go again.
Thank you so much for listening to the very first episode of An Upside Down World podcast with your hosts, Grace Nahum
and Joel McKerrow. Make sure you have a look at the Tearfund website just to check out all that Tear is doing within the world. That's tearfund.org.au, and we'll see you next time.